welcome. This is Sandra Hess, Executive Director of the Calaveras Wine Grape Alliance, and today this is session one of an 8-part series on the history of Calaveras wine country. Thanks for taking some time out to join us as we have two very special guests here. We have Gay Callan. Good morning, Gay.
Good morning. Good morning.
And we have Stephen Couts. If you could go ahead, each of you, and introduce yourselves, that would be great.
Gay, ladies first.
Stephen, I'm Gay Callan. I am the owner of Chatham Vineyards, which I started in 1980, and delighted to still be involved with the wine industry and to be able to participate today.
Thank you.
And my name is Stephen Couts, and I'm president and owner of Ironstone Vineyards. My family has been here gold mining since the early 1900s, and we've been farming in Calaveras County since 1940, growing wine grapes. First started in apples in 76, started growing wine grapes in 1988, and really have been working with some of the pioneers of this industry since the early 80s.
What a pleasure to sit down with both of you today and begin at the beginning. And so when we think about this 8-part series, I love that we're able to begin right at the beginning. And as we do that, I know that winemaking in Calaveras County began in the early years of the gold rush, and something very special about the Calaveras wine region. So the first 1,000 vines were set out in the lower Calaveras River in 1851, according to a Sacramento transcript. And so winemaking was a big part of the history of Calaveras County. The miners who came from all over the world in the 1850s, from Italy, Spain, France, they could see that there was a similar landscape here to their homelands. And so Prentice M. Trask is credited for bringing the art of even dry farming back in the day to the area, with 25,000 vines then planted during the height of the gold rush. So with perfect soil and growing conditions lending themselves to growing great wine grapes, the area had an economic downturn, though, as we all know, with the Prohibition era. And so there's a little bit of a delay in the progress of wine, grape growing, winemaking in Calaveras County then, until the wine renaissance of the 1970s, thanks to Barden Stevenow, the father of the local wine renaissance, as we say, where he planted his historic ranch property near Murphy's. And so a great segue then, into Stephen Couts. You and your family had been planting apple orchards here back in the days.
Actually, my grandfather, we raised cattle, and then, or he raised cattle, and then started wanting to plant some apple trees. And my parents kind of took over the operation up here, the property up here from him, and planted apple trees. And we started getting to know all of the locals around here and working directly with them. I was still raising and still do raise cattle. And it became kind of a part. My family's been growing wine grapes in the Lodi area since around 1923. And so we just kind of started migrating up this way through some history between Barden Stevenow and a winemaker named Steve Milliere.
So how did you all meet, if I can ask?
I think I met Gay and Barden and that whole crew in the old barn down at Barden at the original Stevenow place. Barden used to have case sales down there and wine sales, and the distributor and locals would come in and that. And we started meeting the local community up here at that time that was involved in the wine grapes. That would have been Barden and Gay. And then in 1982, when Steve Milliere went to work for Barden Stevenow down there, he started buying grapes from us out of Lodi and convinced us to put up our first 250 cases in 1982 under the John Couts Farms label. And then our history has progressed since that point.
Oh, great. That's a great story about the community spirit, truly, of Calaveras County, and people getting together and encouraging one another as farmers in the wine production side. So, Gay, what brought you then to Calaveras County and grape growing?
Well, Dan Irving, way back when, and unfortunately we just lost him recently. He was a farm advisor up here. We had a ranch consultant by the name of Eldred Lane, who lived outside of Mountain Ranch. we had Chatham ranches in Turlock and Tulare, and that dated back to the early 1800s. And somehow they were making money, and the accountant called up and said, you need to be able to diversify. And why don't you look at properties in Calaveras County and start growing some grapes? And so my introduction to Calaveras County was through Barden, Stephen O, Dan Irving, and Eldred Lane. And I was born and raised in San Francisco, not thinking that I would ever leave San Francisco. And the next thing I knew, I was moving up here and starting a vineyard with no knowledge of which end of the grape to put in the ground. So basically started the vineyard for Barden, and the first plantings that we did were in 1982. Actually, in 1985, Steve Millier made our first wines, and that was, that it was kind of history. We did custom crush from there on, but I got a taste of how absolutely wonderful the community was and how fascinating the industry was at the time, as small as it was, and decided to move up here lock, stock, and barrel.
So when you started planting grapes, did Barden come alongside and give you some advice and walk the vineyards with you? What did that look like?
It was basically, the ranch that we owned was a cattle ranch, and they had several acres, like probably 70 or 80 acres of hay at the time. It was the old Higgins Ranch. And actually the people that homesteaded it were the Davis family. So we contracted for certain varietals, and he came over, we plotted it out. We're on our own rootstock. We're still on our own rootstock, and the spacing is 7 by 11, which most people, you don't do that today. The one thing I wish I had more of is water, but it was up to Barden, the varietals that he wanted us to plant. And we planted from 81, and then second phase was 82, and third phase was 83. So he contracted for all of the fruit up until about 88, I think.
Mm-hmm. So thank you, Gay. And so Stephen, interesting when you think about this community spirit, thanks to Barden, really inviting what I'm hearing, first of all, as farmers, so you started, Gay, with a cattle farm. And then, of course, your background, Stephen, working with your family in cattle farming. And so you had, some kind of, on your side, background interest in farming. And so when you crossed over to grape growing and wine production, what was that like?
It was natural. We've been growing row crops and vegetable crops down in the valley. Had been growing cherries and had grapes down in the valley.
Mm-hmm.
So as we kind of morphed out of the cows, so to speak, and looked at better use of the land, we went into the apples first in the mid 70s. And as the apple market started to fade, we thought this would be a really nice area to grow grapes and also to start a winery. As I laughingly say, we had two options. You could use Mark Twain's gold, that precious yellow metal, or I could be stuck in Lodi again with our operation. So we elected to come to Murphy's. At that point in time, and Gay's being a little bit modest, it was Barden, Stephen O, Gay Callan, Steve and Liz Millier, ourselves, and Dan Olson's were the only ones up here really doing anything with the wine grapes and the wines. So, and Olson's were the original black sheep. So, and all of us were intertwined between Barden, Stephen O, and Steve Millier at that point in time. And it formed a really good community, a really good bond, working with everybody. Murphy's was not the mecca, so to speak, of tasting rooms and restaurants and things. You had the Murphy's Hotel, and that was the only place to get food. Oh, the peppermint stick, you get ice. But it was that kind of early days of getting started and the fledgling of getting Calaveras County recognized, period. I remember those early days, and Gay and Steve and Barden, we'd go to tastings down in the valley, and everybody wanted to lump us in with Mendocino. And it's like, no, we're Calaveras. We're in the Sierra foothills. And there was really no recognition, even though we had a tremendous history in the wine grapes with the early pioneers that settled in this area. And some of the first vineyards in the state of California outside of the missions were planted in Calaveras County. So it's been a long struggle to get the recognition for Calaveras and the wine grape community. And I think we owe a lot of that to Barden and Gay and Steve Milliere and things that were created at that point in time.
Mhm. I hear that. And you think about today, over 40 tasting rooms now throughout Calaveras wine country, award-winning wines being produced, tourism in this space, as you talked about, the mecca of, the what to do, where to go now, downtown Murphy's. And so next week, we're going to touch on memories of Barden Steveno, where we've invited some friends, including Liz and Steve Milliere and others, to share memories of Barden and his unique focus and style of grape growing and winemaking. I'd love for each of you to share your early memories of Barden and how he inspired you and with his focus and his passion for winemaking.
A visionary that was bringing Calaveras into its own. I mean, the timber industry was big. Cattle was still big at the time. Most of us, when we were looking for properties, we looked in Healdsburg and the Napa area, and even in the late 70s, which is when we started to look, the price of properties were just, I mean, even back then, very unreasonable. Now you can't touch them. I think having his enthusiasm and passion, and he worked his land. He was hands on. He was always hands on with not only the cultivation of his own ranch, but the winemaking aspect of itself. He did have other winemakers. Bob and Julia Iantosca, I believe, were there just prior to Steve Milliere coming in, and then Chuck Hovey came in. But it was his passion. It was something that was changing the community. And for me to come up here, I really didn't know anything about farming, even though my family had ranches and farmed for a couple of generations prior to this. I think it was his knowledge and what he wanted to share and how he envisioned the changes that would happen within this community. I don't think he thought there would be 40 tasting rooms, but the quality and it wasn't even simple, but the simplicity of it to bring the people in that he brought in was captivating. It really was captivating. He was very honest about what he wanted to accomplish, and he did a really good job of doing that. So I was delighted to be part of that.
For us, I think Gay touched on it. It was his overall enthusiasm and just true love and commitment for Calaveras County and the Murphys area. And it was contagious. I remember early meetings between my family, my dad and Barden, sitting down on Barden's deck out there and talking about what the vision was for Calaveras. And my dad, the patriarch of our family, and my mom were very in tune to that, and they could see that vision and excitement that Barden was creating. I think Gay nailed it on the head. I don't think any of us anticipated there'd be 40 plus tasting rooms in Murphy's or in Calaveras County. But I think that we all recognize this as a really premier wine grape growing area, that we could grow some tremendous varietals, not just the old European varieties that were brought over in the beginning, the Barberas and the Carrigans and the Primitivos and those sorts of things, but we could grow really good quality grapes that would compete with anybody there. And it's been the transition and growth of the winemakers and understanding these grapes and the growers finally getting a really good handle on how to grow grapes in Calaveras. You have to remember that there were no miners around to do it. The farm advisors that were here were very heavily to cattle, livestock, timber. That was the industries. And so to find farm advisors who really understand growing premium wine grapes in Calaveras County was difficult. It's different growing grapes up here than in the Lodi area where our family is, or over in Napa and Sonoma and that. And I think now we've really got a good handle on how to grow those grapes and how to get the best quality of wines out of the grapes that we produce.
I was really just blown away last year's vineyard tour in June. As Stephen Collum and others walked us through the different soil profiles and how diverse the profiles can be in like literally a 5-foot space, right? In Calaveras County, the unique wines and varietals that are being produced here in the spring of 2020. Barbera has had a huge resurgence in Calaveras County. We're seeing obviously beautiful Tempraneos and Sangioveses, and in some cases the Bordeaux style wines from our friends up at the highest elevation vineyard up at Bryce Stewart and his crew. And so when we think about back in the day, Gay, the first wines that were being shared out at the barn that you talk about, what were those wines?
Chenin Blanc. There was very little Chardonnay up here at the time. Barden had an absolutely gorgeous Chenin Blanc. So it was Chenin Blanc, it was Sauvignon Blanc. We had a little bit of Semillon to blend with that. Barden did have Chardonnay, but we also found that once Glen Ellen, or I'm not really even sure I don't remember the winery that came in and had Chardonnay at $2.99 a bottle. Chenin just started falling apart. The classic Zins were here, the classic Cabs, and Merlot. So I mean, there were really maybe 6 different varietals. It was pretty. It wasn't as experimental as it is today, and we planted over the course of 3 years, we planted 65 acres of fruit, and it was predominantly Chenin, Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon, Cab, Merlot, and Zinfandel.
Interesting. And so, Stephen, you produce some very interesting wines at Ironstone. I mean, really a variety. Some of these that today that Gay touched on from years ago, you're producing some of these still today. But can you share with us, what the vision was for Ironstone originally and kind of how that's changed today?
Our vision originally was the Bordeaux varieties. We really focused on the Cabernet Franc, the Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon. We've got Petit Verdot and Malbec here. And then Chardonnay. And we really thought that there was a lot of European varieties, Italian varieties, and things being produced in Calaveras County, but that you can go anywhere and sell Chardonnay and Cabernet Sauvignon to anybody. And so we wanted to grow those grapes up here and really thought it was going to make a great area. As we've kind of morphed through, Verdejo, Tempranillo, Petit Syrah is an absolute winner up here. We grow the old Muscat, and then you asked the question in Barden's barn. I remember the dry Muscat that he used to do next to the Chenin Blanc, and it was a wonderful dry Muscat. People kind of forgot what that was like, and so we're trying to replicate that again. And I see a lot of different varieties being grown, but for us at Ironstone, really Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, Chardonnay are our kingpins, and then this little variety called Symphony that we picked up and started playing with from Dr. Omo out of UC Davis, and it's come to be really a mainstay for Ironstone.
I mean, I see the awards that you receive for that wine year after year, so congratulations there.
Thank you.
Well, next week we are going to touch on, again, memories of Barden and going a little bit deeper into some of the stories around that. But you both have shared some wonderful insights, beginning at the beginning of what it felt like, to be the pioneers and to start wine making and grape growing here in Calaveras County. And so, Gay, I know today you're still out there on tractors. You're out there at night during harvest. Congratulations on all that you've done for this region. You are very modest in your statements, but we could not be here today without you. So thank you for all that you do. Any words of wisdom you want to leave wine makers, growers in the Calaveras region today?
I would say keep at it. It's the industry has grown so well and so professionally, and yet it's still fun. It really is still fun. I think that there's a lot that more wineries can tap into, and growers can tap into. We've been very, very, very fortunate, to have the relationships with the wineries that we do. and to be able to cultivate award-winning fruit. So I hope the energy continues, and I hope it expands, throughout the county, not just stays in one spot. But I think Calaveras is still underestimated, and I still think we not that we have a lot more to learn, but I think we have a lot more to be able to accomplish. And Sandra, under your guidance, a lot has transpired in the last few years to really have the acknowledgement of Calaveras get more on the map. So I thank you too. And Stephen, the Couts family has done a tremendous service to this community. You guys have brought so many tourist attractions and people into the community that we probably would not have had your family not built the winery and had that vision to move Calaveras into another level. So thanks to you as well.
I have to say, every time I visit Ironstone, I find something new, a new discovery on the grounds, the picnic spaces or the outdoor, areas where families can play frisbee and the beautiful topiaries. And it just kind of goes on and on. The outdoor amphitheater, of course, I've had many good times at the tours, caves. I mean, it just goes on and on as far as the exploration there. So I mirror Gay in saying thank you to you and your family, Stephen, for all that the Couts family has done for the Calaveras wine region. Any final words of wisdom you'd like to share with the audience?
Well, first and foremost, thank you very much. As everybody knows, Ironstone's a part of this community, and that's how we feel. And I really think that the words of wisdom I have is Calaveras County is one of those unique areas where you can come and bring your family and feel really comfortable. There's so many things to do, outdoor activities, but it's really family oriented. Every winemaker here is a family operated business. And I think people still want, especially today, are really looking for that uniqueness and not only the wine grapes and that, but that home feeling that I know who's making the wines, I know who's growing the grapes, I know who's bringing this bottle to me. And I think that's really, really important. And I think for the future of Calaveras County, it's going to be even more important. We're one of the few areas that are completely family welcome in every tasting room that you go into. You see that in all the areas here. I'm not gonna to pull a punch. There's every wine region in the world can grow good grapes and make good wine. The uniqueness of Calaveras County is our story, our history, our family commitment, and the welcoming open arms we have for families and people to come visit us.
Well, I've so enjoyed our time together today. I can't thank you both enough. Audience, please continue to watch our 8-part series. We hope that you've enjoyed the beginning discussion today of Calaveras Wine Country. We encourage you to drink Calaveras. Check us out at calaveraswines.org. Explore wonderful ways to enjoy the wines and experiences in Calaveras Wine Country. Cheers to you all.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.